Thank you for joining Plant-Based Treaty at Bonn Climate Conference. Today we'll talk about how we can address 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions from the food system. To quote Johan Rockström, the director of Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, the final battle over whether we successfully deliver on the Paris targets rests on whether we are able to transform the food system. We are here to insist that that transformation starts today, and we are urging world leaders to start the negotiation of a global plant-based treaty attached to the UN Convention on Climate Change ahead of COP29. My name is Kimmy Cushman, Scientific Advisor for Plant-Based Treaty, and I'll provide a brief overview of food impacts on Earth's planetary boundaries. Xananine Calvillo Ramirez, a Plant-Based Treaty Ambassador, will talk about food impacts on our social boundaries and specifically how animal agriculture is harming Indigenous communities. Leah Phillips, a Plant-Based Treaty City campaigner, will explain Plant-Based Treaty's goals, strategies, and implementation at the city level. We are also joined by our very special guest, Heather Mills, who has come to Bonn to support the call for a global plant-based treaty and to talk about the solutions and policy tools needed for a plant-based food system. Heather Mills is an entrepreneur, charity campaigner, world record holder, and Paralympic ski racer. She launched the multi-award-winning plant-based vegan ethical food company VBites to feed people who found it hard to give up meat, fish, and dairy products delicious alternatives. The way we produce food is the single largest reason that we have transgressed planetary boundaries and is the single largest threat to the habitability of the Earth and our life support systems. It also risks our future in terms of social boundaries, such as Indigenous protection, food security, pandemics and antibiotic resistance, public health, and diet-related disease. Despite these interconnected crises, we can still turn the sinking ship around. Transforming the food system through a plant-based treaty offers a major opportunity to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement, as well as address threats to other planetary and social boundaries. If you haven't already, please download our Safe and Just report, where you can read about food's impacts on planetary and social boundaries, and where we introduce our vegan donut economics framework to transition to a safe and just food system. You will find a flyer on your chair with a QR code to scan and access the report. This graph from the Stockholm Resilience Center shows the planetary boundaries concept within which we can continue to develop for generations to come. As you will see in the oranges and reds, 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries have already been breached. Climate change, biodiversity, land use change, freshwater change, nitrogen and phosphorus pollution, and novel entities. You will notice that 4 of these boundaries are in the red high-risk zone, and ocean acidification is close to being breached. The only boundary moving in the right direction is ozone depletion. Breaching any one of these boundaries is dangerous, risking the triggering of irreversible tipping points and Earth system collapse. What most people don't know is that animal agriculture impacts more planetary boundaries than any other industry. It's a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, water use, pollution, and it's the leading cause of land use change and biodiversity loss. Today, I'll focus mainly on the boundaries for climate and land use change. To understand how we got here, this graph on the left tracks a massive acceleration in global per capita meat consumption. Between 1980 and 2020, per capita meat consumption grew 50%, from 30 to 45 kilograms per person per year. On the right, you can see FAO projections for increased demand in meat and egg consumption worldwide between now and 2050. The projected rise in the consumption of chicken and other birds is 66%. And cow and buffalo products will rise by nearly 60% between 2013 and 2050. Even if we ended fossil fuels today, the rising food emissions would breach the Paris Agreement. Food is responsible for 1/3 of greenhouse gases, the majority of which comes from animal agriculture. This means that a plant-based transition is essential for a Paris-aligned food system. In fact, the Harvard Law School Animal Law and Policy Program noted in a 2024 study that animal agriculture emissions must peak by 2030 to avoid a catastrophic 2 degrees C global warming. How exactly is animal farming heating the planet? The UN 2021 methane assessment shows that to achieve the 1.5 degrees C target of the Paris Agreement, methane emissions must be cut by around 45% this decade. Doing so would prevent a 0.3 degrees C temperature rise between now and 2045. This would buy us more time to address carbon emissions. As you can see from the pie chart, the food sector is by far the largest contributor to human-caused methane emissions. Animal agriculture is the largest contributor at around a third of emissions. Many cities and countries are already taking action to reduce food waste, and we are overdue to start a plan to cut meat and dairy consumption. When it comes to carbon dioxide emissions, food is also a major contributor and is directly related to how we convert and use land. Farming animals is the leading cause of land use change and deforestation, which, as well as contributing to escalating carbon emissions, is fueling the global biodiversity crisis. Land is being cleared in the Amazon to grow corn and soy feed crops for chickens and to graze cattle for meat and dairy. 83% of farmland is used to raise animals, but it provides only 18% of calories. This is because we have a food system that uses 92 billion land animals every year. We also need to feed and give water to those animals. For every 100 grams of feed fed to farmed animals, we just get 22 grams of protein from eggs and only three from cows. If we instead grew crops to feed directly to humans, we would see a significant, rapid transformation on Earth and huge reductions in emissions and strengthening food security. In fact, a plant-based food system would create an opportunity to rewild 75% of agricultural land, allowing for the transformation of massive carbon sinks. It would also help improve biodiversity and prevent further land use change and deforestation. To put that land size into context, the area saved by transitioning to a plant-based food system is equivalent to being able to rewild the area the size of the United States, China, the European Union, and Australia combined. I will now pass it on to Xananine to talk about how a plant-based transition is a just transition.
Thank you so much. And also, animal agriculture and the food system as it currently is now does not only impact the Earth's physical limits, but also our social boundaries. And shifting to a plant-based food system will help us create a safer and fairer community. More than 600 million people have already been displaced from their climate niche due to global temperature rises. And the shifting in our climate niche affects not only humans, but also other animals, ecosystems, and the reliability and predictability of food systems that have evolved alongside it. A just transition using a plant-based treaty will give us a fighting chance to limit global temperature rises and limit the numbers of climate refugees who will have to flee their homelands when areas of the earth have become unlivable. And halting agricultural expansion and giving land back to communities would also protect indigenous people who are at the front lines defending nature. In Latin America, factory farming is the single largest driver of land conversion. And that is being already experienced in our Ingiwa land in the Tehuacan region, which is my homeland, where the factory farming agribusiness is taking over our ancestral land, an already fragile ecosystem, to create profit out of animal exploitation, indigenous rights violation, soil erosion, water stress, and air pollution. On the conflict cases in our specific region, registered by the Environmental Justice Atlas, all the conflicts are related to animal agriculture industries. where the poultry industry is systematically drying up the sacred groundwater of our tropical desert. Food systems transformation is also an issue of indigenous rights. Our relation to land is under attack by the expansion of animal agriculture businesses. What many don't know is that the very first introduction of livestock in our region was made through colonization. Now it's being repeated by big ag promotion of Western meat-based diets. But as indigenous peoples are resisting the extractive industrial animal agriculture and factory farming systems, our duty is to learn from the ancestral plant-based food traditions, like the Mesoamerican one, rooted in our plants' biodiversity, agroecological sowing traditions, and ancestral diets. According to the 2022 Global Witness Report, Latin America is the most dangerous region in the world to be a human rights defender in environmental issues. And the industry that is directly linked with the most human rights violations and lethal attacks toward environmental defenders is the agribusiness. More than a fifth, 22% of the murder being small-scale farmers, and more than a third of lethal attacks being indigenous peoples. Factory farming is now not only a threat to the environment, but a danger to the people defending water, forest, life itself. In my Ingigua community in Tehuacan, Puebla, our youth, our elders, are being openly against the expansion of poultry industries and factory farming, despite the risk. And now I will pass to Leah to explain how the Plant-Based Treaty presents a roadmap for food sustainability.
The Plant-Based Treaty are here at the SP60 Bonn Climate Change Conference to request a global treaty attached to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to help us transition to a plant-based food system so that we can live safely within our planetary and social boundaries. Our secondary goal is for towns, cities, and institutions to implement the very best practices in plant-based food policies and rewilding. As you'll see in the next few slides, we're already making progress on this second goal. The Plant-Based Treaty is modeled on the Fossil Fuel Treaty. Our theory of change is to create bottom-up pressure on governments to negotiate a global plant-based treaty by collecting endorsements and encouraging action from millions of individuals, including celebrities, scientists, politicians, tens of thousands of groups and businesses, and hundreds of cities. You've probably already spotted us outside the entrance collecting endorsements and asking people to eat a plant-based diet for the duration of the conference. Since our launch at COP26 in Glasgow, more than 150,000 individuals, 3,000 groups and businesses, and 30 cities have endorsed the treaty. Individual endorsements include more than 1,000 politicians, ranging from town and city councillors to mayors, members of parliament, and senators. These endorsements are from across the political spectrum. The treaty has been endorsed by climate and social scientists, 5 Nobel laureates, organizations such as the UK Health Alliance on Climate Change, celebrities, healthcare professionals, and youth leaders. 30 towns, cities, and districts have endorsed the call for the Plant-Based Treaty as a companion to the Paris Agreement, including Amsterdam, Los Angeles, and Edinburgh. Along with creating pressure for a global treaty, endorsements help raise awareness about the need to address food impacts on the environment and normalize the consumption of plant-based foods at an individual and institutional level. As well as supporting the call for a plant-based treaty, many cities are developing action plans that align with the goals of the treaty. Amsterdam Council have committed to daily plant-based options in public institutions, including schools. In 2024, they want to introduce Vegan Fridays with 100% plant-based catering in public institutions. They've set a goal for 60% of the city's protein consumption to be plant-based by 2030, compared to today's current level of 40%. Edinburgh Council endorsed the treaty in January 2023, following a 9-month impact assessment. The endorsement committed them to creating a plant-based treaty action plan, which was voted through in January 2024. The action plan will be revisited annually and includes partnership with Climato to introduce a carbon labeling trial in schools and universities and conduct public education campaigns. increased plant-based provisions, ensuring options are available in council buildings and schools. They're also doing trainings and plant-based cookery workshops and inviting catering companies to endorse the plant-based treaty. Edinburgh is showing climate action leadership by promoting plant-based treaty. Council leader David Lammy recorded a video calling for Eurocities to endorse the plant-based treaty. They wrote to the Scottish minister inviting Scotland to endorse, and they've written to mayors of their sister cities inviting them to endorse as well. Along with the endorsement, Xmas Council voted to include campaigns and activities to encourage a switch to plant-based foods in their action plans. A transition to 100% plant-based catering at climate meetings and events, reducing public consumption of animal-based foods through education in schools, organizations, and local businesses. Enhancing food justice by supporting projects that provide access to healthy food for all, especially low-income communities. Lambeth was the first London Borough Council in the UK to endorse the plant-based treaty, reducing the carbon emissions per plate in school dinners by around 38% within 3 years. In addition, the council wants to work to implement free school meals to help with food poverty. Public education campaigns such as promoting the plant-based treaty and initiatives such as Veganuary. The council have been awarded £5 million from the National Institute of Health Research. With that money, the council have set up a big research capacity called Lambeth Heart. The council hopes it will be possible to run a research project around plant-based diets and try to get some funding so that Lambeth Heart can evaluate its effect on our residents' health and the local food economy. As well as action at a city level, which can help promote and improve access to plant-based foods, we also need policy change at the national and global level. I will now pass on to Heather Mills, who's going to talk about some solutions we need to implement now as part of a plant-based treaty to enable a fair and just food system that meets our nutritional needs and strengthens food security. She's also going to talk about why climate conferences should be fully plant-based.
Thanks to my colleagues at Plant-Based Treaty for so articulately and eloquently explaining the science and the facts that we've been talking about for the last 30 years, but hopefully at this conference, a difference can hopefully be made. We've been to thousands of these types of events around the world, seen a lot of people talk, a lot of people come in with enthusiasm, and then a small group of not so like-minded, powerful people block, create legal issues, create problems. So the bottom line is we know the science, we know the disaster that's about to hit us, and we can either bury our heads in the sand or use the force of the majority to get the people in power that can present those and create the solutions. So the most basic one, which always shocks me, is why this conference is not 100% plant-based. You know, you've only got 10 days. Even if you don't choose to go plant-based for the rest of the year, you can at least contribute a little bit to minimizing global warming by making it 100% plant-based. It's not like when I became vegan 32 years ago where you're going to get shriveled up grilled vegetables. You can get fantastic meals now. So we've had some good meetings with the catering. You know, they've done the best that they can, but they were told by the delegates apparently that they wanted meat, fish and dairy to be on the menu, which just shocks me because nobody interested in climate change would even be eating those products. So we need to look at that as a small thing to show that we are here to create climate change. And then one of the biggest things we need to do is to push through and get the subsidies allocated to farmers to grow grains, fruits and vegetables, because they're not helped enough. We've done a lot of pilot tests around the world over the last couple of decades, proving that the taxpayers shouldn't be covering the costs of farmers to get cheaper meat, fish and dairy, because they're technically paying for it out their back pocket. And we've proven you can actually convert specific arable land to grow things like oats, which we can then make into vegan oat cheese, which is why I created the company VBites 30 years ago to start doing this. So they can get a 12 to 17% EBITDA and be independent within 2 to 3 years. So these are viable solutions. The other thing that can be done, which has a domino effect to create health, is to change what we're feeding people in hospitals. The food is absolutely disgusting. It's expensive. We waste £500 million a year, for example, in the UK, feeding people that have just come out of heart attack, strokes, and open heart surgery, steak and chips, meat and mash, and ice cream and jelly. So there needs to be some common sense put into this approach, and by converting them to 100% plant-based, detoxing, half the cost, 250 million, would be saved on the analysis that we've done. The nurses wouldn't have to clean up their mess, which is also, creating methane. And that money could go to those that are working really hard and have a positive effect on climate change by only feeding plant-based options. The one time you can control someone's diet, and people do need help in controlling their diet because of lack of willpower and lots of other reasons. So there are so many solutions that will have a positive effect on climate change, but also on people's health, and also minimizing animal cruelty. So we know that it's all about money, so we've proven it in financial models that you can minimize the subsidies by getting everyone to convert to growing plants. We know that depletes CO2 emissions. That's all scientifically proven. I mean, even Lidl, a huge German-owned supermarket, has actually matched their vegan, meat-free options to the cost of meat, and they found a huge upturn in the purchase. So it is down to pricing as well, because the alternates out there, if you choose the right ones, are absolutely fantastic. So they're really simple things that can be utilized if the people stop thinking about all the financials benefiting themselves and start to care about their children, the future of the planet. And we don't have to leave our mess from our generation behind for our kids to clean up, and for the youth next to us to have to keep pointing out the scientific facts. So if you have any care about climate change, people say, oh, well, I can't do anything as an individual. Well, you can. The first thing you can do is go plant-based. So please have a look at the plant-based treaty science that's been presented. Consider what you eat and what you consume as an individual and within your family. And when they ask you, do you want meat, fish, and dairy at the COP events, please say no, we want the plant-based options. And if you don't want to pay for them, we've got free hot dogs, vegan hot dogs outside. If you haven't tried them already, they're delicious, and we've been selling them for 32 years, but they're fresh at the moment. The other thing that needs to be considered is if everybody actually had said, just at this conference with 6,000 attendees over 10 days, that they wanted to go plant-based, you would have saved millions and millions of liters of water and millions of kilograms of grain, and that is a scientific fact. So just at this conference alone, we are contributing to global warming, which is farcical when you think about it. Thank you very much.
So if we have a bit of time, we'll take a few questions. Can someone tell me how much time we have? 3 minutes. Okay, so yeah, maybe 1 or 2 questions. Yes.
Give me a second. It's just a very simple question. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to hold these discussions under the auspices of the FAO, since they already host 2 plant treaties, the International Plant Genetics Treaty and the International Plant Protection Treaty? And they also have a very robust program on agriculture and climate change.
Yes,
it strikes me it'd be very difficult. It'd be easier for you to implement, and also it'd be a standalone treaty, because if you go with the UNFCCC, it becomes a protocol, which usually, not all the time, you would have less authority than a standalone treaty. Thank you.
Yeah, we basically speak to all areas, but today we're here for COP because you're here about climate change, and there are a lot of influential people, so I think it's important to speak to all parties and all groups. What do you think?
Yep. We are in conversation with the UNFAO. Thank you.
And anyone that will talk to us. that can make a difference. That gentleman there.
One of the points in the plant-based treaty is having a tax on meat and methane, which I support. But is your organization lobbying actively for it, or asking for instance, the cities or other co-signers to support that as well in their country, national level?
Do you want to answer that? Or do you want me to? I think that we're lobbying on it in many areas, but it has to be explained very specifically, because there's no point adding a tax to something that's already being subsidized, because then technically the taxpayer is actually paying that tax. So it needs to be relayed to the fact that the government should be taxing huge corporations that are contributing to methane. I mean, I created the first vegan McDonald's burger in 2003, and then the vegan Burger King and the vegan cheese and the vegan Domino's cheese. And what should be and we as manufacturers, because I've never took money from my business in 30 years, it goes to support climate change improvement and animal sanctuaries. So when people say, oh, it's because you've got a vegan business, it's not actually true. But the taxes should go on things that are contributing to global warming and climate change disadvantages, but also things that are contributing to ill health. I mean, you know, high fructose corn syrup, you know, meat, fish and dairy should all have high taxes on it, and yet it's subsidized and it's contributing to the devastation. So there needs to be taxes on it as a group, and then we should be reducing any form of taxes on healthy products so that people can have access to them no matter what their income is. I mean, it's just basic common sense again. Thank you.
I think that's about all the time we have, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sorry to shove you off. It's always that way, isn't it?
Yes.
So let's see if we can do this. I'll let you deal with this. Amy, do you have the